I think I get dehydrated and I forget God. So I'm drinking Pellegrino. The tea I'm drinking isn't strong. And it's got 2 ginger and probiotic tea bags. And the ginger tastes good. Excuse me. I've eaten 3 sandwich crackers. 3 little crackers. What's happening to you? It's supposed to thunderstorm all day tomorrow. No, all weekend delay is said. No. Caprice. Caprice is here. I have it in my Amazon cart to buy her a $10 gift. 4 deer whistles. Because she was saying she works in a pretty rural area and she's really afraid of hitting a deer. $10 and like 79 cents for food. You're ultrasonic. It was 8 something for 2. And 10 something for 4. She's got a pretty big car, so I figure she could use 4. I guess she's gonna have to figure out how to put them, well, where to put them and blah blah blah. I think that I'll go in the front. You can hide in the grill, that's what some of the reviews said. And it only got 1 bad review of about the 12 I read. So and I should be getting my HP ink any day now. I can print up. I'm gonna print up this picture of Paul. And then I had drawn him a bird as a birthday gift a couple years after I left work. And I took it and handed it to one of the employees. I think it was Corrine. And asked her to give it to him for his birthday. So, I don't know. She said he still worked there when I asked her. Dino says he's unhappy living in a universe with God in it. Oh, pardon me. They torture me. The evil ones torture me when I do life-sustaining things like eat or drink water. or smoke cigarettes. I love tea so much, and Diet Coke. Diet generic, usually. I forget to drink water. Oops.
There's a little bake shop in Southampton, New York called Tate's that became legendary with people far and wide.
President Biden is touting a new bipartisan deal on an infrastructure bill. Our senior White House correspondent Phil Mattingly is working the story for.
Evening from New York, I'm Chris Hayes. You know, it's the kind of thing we really do not see happen often anymore. This afternoon, the President of the United States, President Joe Biden, walked out to the White House driveway surrounded by Democratic and Republican senators to announce they have a deal, a big bipartisan legislative deal on infrastructure.
This reminds me of the days we used to get an awful lot done up in the United States Congress. We actually worked with them. We got bipartisan deals. Bipartisan deals means compromise.
Are you confident that you're going to have all of the Democrat support in the Senate?
I'm not confident except that's frustrating.
Now we're going to get into the details of the deal, which includes $579 billion in new spending on new projects across the country and a somewhat complicated two-track strategy in which Democrats would also pass a supplemental package alongside that. In fact, I'm going to talk to Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut about all of that in just a moment. But first, I just want to take a step back to put this deal in context with the very strange politics of this particular moment. Back in the beginning of February, after the insurrection and sort of taking in the aftermath the election, I published this piece in The Atlantic, in which I made the argument that the Republican Party was radicalizing against democracy, even as it was moderating on some core elements of policy. And the events of the past few days have, I think, borne out that thesis. I mean, remember, it's just 48 hours ago, I was sitting at this desk talking to you, right? Senate Democrats attempted to expand voter access to create a kind of nationwide floor of voting rights standards. And that bill, the For the People Act, faced uniform, total opposition from Republicans who used the filibuster to block it. Not a single Republican would vote to even start debate on the bill. And Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell made it clear that there's basically nothing Democrats can do to ever get any Republican support on any part of that bill. I mean, certainly not on things like, for instance, changing the standards for partisan gerrymandering, or even reinstating the parts of the Voting Rights Act that the John Roberts Supreme Court gutted. I mean, let's keep in mind, this is the same Voting Rights Act, which was last reauthorized in 2006, with a massive bipartisan majority in the House and a unanimous vote in the Senate. In fact, the person who got all Republican senators to vote for it was then Majority Whip Mitch McConnell. That same Voting Rights Act now faces essentially implacable Republican opposition. So that's what I mean by radicalizing against democracy. And we're watching this radicalization happen at the state level, of course, where Republican-controlled governments are passing restrictive voting laws. Multiple states are now trying to follow Arizona's lead and launch an audit of the 2020 election results. In fact, new polling, get this, shows 46% of Republicans, almost half, believe it was appropriate for Republican legislators in states where Joe Biden won to just ignore the popular vote and to try and assign their state's electoral votes to Donald Trump. That is about as radicalized against democracy as you could possibly get. Now, 2 days later, what do we have? The White House driveway. We have an old-fashioned sausage-making infrastructure deal announced on the White House driveway with a bipartisan group, including 11 Republican senators. How do we make sense of this? Well, the Republican Party's ideology on core matters of governance has dissipated into incoherence. I mean, really, core questions about political economy specifically, right? Free enterprise and the market are so detached from the actual material interests of its base. Those policies that they've been championing forever, right? Tax cuts for the rich, you're on your own economics, they've become so unpopular. They have been surely but slowly walking away from it all, at least in rhetoric and messaging. Because here's the thing, they've lost the ability to rile the base, the current base, the Trump base. They've lost the ability to rile them up on those core issues anymore. It doesn't work.
Please help, my stomach out there attacking it pretty hard.
I mean, compare that
Firm,
right, to where we were 12 years ago,
firm.
and the unrelenting
Firm,
backlash
firm,
against the
firm,
Obama
firm,
stimulus,
firm.
which came in response to the Great Recession. In 2009, the American Recovery Act, which was less than $1 trillion, was passed with 0 Republican votes in the House.
But the bill that was supposed to be about jobs has turned into a bill that's all about spending.
Do you know that in this Portuguese bill, it has been learned, in addition to everything else, illegal immigrants will also be given checks?
I look at this as smother the private sector in terms of a stimulus package. I don't see this as a stimulus package.
And if you think you're going to get your way out of this recession by all kinds of social programs, welfare programs, it's just going to make it much worse.
Right? Oh, the immigrants getting free checks, welfare, social programs. Look at Barack Obama just spending that money around. Okay, compare that to back in March when Joe Biden signed the COVID stimulus package, right? Because for the second time in 2 transitions, a Democrat had to take over from a Republican that left the Republican rooms, right? So, apples to apples comparison, Biden passes the American Rescue Plan, right? No Republican votes. I barely heard a word from Republicans about that package, twice as big as the stimulus, nearly $2 trillion package that passed on a party line vote in the Senate more than 3 months ago. I didn't hear a word except to praise aspects of it they want the constituents to take advantage of. There's nothing there to mind. What riles up the Republican base now is fear of multiracial democracy, cancel culture, George Floyd protests, Black Lives Matter, censoring Dr. Seuss, critical race theory, constant moral panic about the threat of those other people who either do not look like you or do not share your values, taking power and wielding power, the way that they dominate the institutions of American life outside of politics. That's what it's about. That culture war, whose culture it is, whose America it is what the base cares about. They could give about inflation or taxes or even welfare. I mean, all this stuff that's been tried and true Republican reactionary rhetoric for literal decades, all the rhetorical fire has moved away from the deficit and on some random school superintendent in Maine after his district dared to denounce white supremacy after the murder of George Floyd. Now, those are the kinds of lines Republicans cannot cross. But spending hundreds of billions of dollars on infrastructure? Whatever, no problem. And of course, I mean, we gotta talk about the obvious, right? The additional glaringly obvious aspect of all this. When you compare the first 6 months of the last Democratic president's administration to this one, Barack Obama faced total opposition on the right from the outset. Now, Joe Biden has faced a lot of opposition too, but there's just no universe, as someone who covered this from Washington, D.C. up close, in which 11 Republican senators would have come out, posed down that driveway to strike a deal like this with Barack Obama in his first 6 months in office. No universe. The hatred of Barack Obama was so boiling hot from the base. The base doesn't hate Joe Biden. I mean, we've seen it over and over since the campaign. When t-shirt vendors at Trump rallies couldn't sell any derogatory Joe Biden shirts. The Barack Obama, the Hillary Clinton stuff, however, it still sold like hotcakes. Huh. Boy, look at those three faces. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden. Now, what could it possibly be about Joe Biden that does not inspire the same visceral ire of the Republican base? That doesn't render him toxic and threatening in the same way as those other two figures. Joe Biden, 78-year-old white man, is now living embodiment of the existential threat the Republican base fears. And that existential threat, that fear of the country being governed by people other than them, broadly construed, that's what they really care about. The rest, they couldn't kill us.
I'm like, it's too, Paul.